Afternoon, everyone. Keep warm and safe this chilly Sunday in Melbourne with a light offering, which is for her uncle, Harold Lenders. Meditation is that the light offering is for Jill's uncle, Harold Lenders, who passed away on Tuesday, 20th of July. And we reflect, may this offering of light to all Buddhas, Bodhisattvas and holy beings be the cause that he is guided through the bardos and achieves a higher rebirth with access to the Dharma, and that he quickly attains enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings. So we take some time to reflect like that. Okay, then we begin with the prayers, and at the risk of freaking out the neighbours, we'll do some Tibetan. So we'll do firstly the prayer of praise to Shakyamuni Buddha in Tibetan and then English. Champa Chandende Dejin Shepa Trachampa Yangpa Dapa Son Sanje Ripadang Shapsu Tempa Dewa Shepa Jiten Shepa Chebudoe Kalo Jua Lana Mepa Ladang Minamchi Tempa Sanje Chondende Beljawa Shakya Tupala Shasalo Churu Chapsu Chiwo. Teacher, Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly pure and complete Buddha, all-knowing, having poise, Sugata, apprehender of the world, navigator of beings to be subdued, incomparable, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha, the Bhagawan, the glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And then the refuge and bodhichitta prayer, which we will also do in both Tibetan and English. Sangyecho dang so chi cho nam la jang chu baru dani cha su chi dai ge jin so ji pe so nam ji Rola penchi sange drupasho. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. And the short mandala offering, which we'll also do in Tibetan and English. O Saji Puchi Chujin Me to tram Rera Lenji Nye Sangye Jendo me this ground, anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, adorned with sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land, and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such pure lands. And then we'll do the 7-limbed prayer on page 21 of the prayer book. I prostrate my 3 doors with a mind of respect and offer all actually arranged and mentally emanated offerings. I reveal all the downfalls and negativities that I have ever collected and rejoice in the virtues of individuals and superiors. Please remain perfectly abiding until samsara is no longer seen. I request you to turn the vast and profound wheels of Dharma. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. And the prayer of the lineage of gurus, which we'll do only in English today. Body born from 1,000,000 magnificent, excellent virtues, speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite beings, a mind that sees all object of knowledge precisely, I bow my head to the chief among the Shakyas. Supreme sons of the incomparable teacher, carrying the load of all the conqueror's deeds by their emanations appearing in countless realms, I prostrate to Maitreya and Manjushri. The mother of conquerors is difficult to fathom. The precise thought is in commentaries written by Jambuvipa's ornaments, Nagarjuna and Asanga. I prostrate at the feet of those most renowned in the 3 realms. From these 2 great chariots come the excellent lineages of the paths of profound view and vaster deeds, their essential points gathered thoroughly and without fault. Prostration to the lamp holding this treasury of instruction. Giving explanation through compassion by seeing precisely and completely the essential points of all paths of Sutra and Tantra, holder of the conqueror's entire holy Dharma, prostrations to the glorious Losang Drogpa. I, seeing all the infinite teachings, supreme way of crossing for those entering the journey's liberation, moved by compassion to deeds skilled in method, prostrations to the spiritual masters who make everything clear. And then we'll recite the Great Treasury of Excellence, the Prayer of the Path to Enlightenment in English. It begins on page 27 of the prayer book. The kind master is the basis of all qualities, and proper alliance is the root of the path. By seeing this excellence and through much striving, bestow blessings to be devoted with great respect. This gentle support of freedom, obtained this one time, is most difficult to achieve. Knowing its great value gives rise to a mind seizing its essence constantly day and night. Bestow blessings to generate this continual unceasingly. It is like a bubble in water, this constantly moving body and life. Thus remember the swift collapse of death. Beyond death, like body and shadow, white and black karmic results follow after. By gaining firm certainty in this, the massive faults, subtle and very subtle, are abandoned, and the accomplishment of all virtuous collections completed. Bestow blessings to ever retain conscientiousness. The qualities of samsara are unfit to be trusted. The door to all suffering, do not be content with these enjoyments. By knowing its defects, bestow blessings to develop a great aspiration for the bliss of liberation. By that pure thought, great conscientiousness is drawn forth, and mindfulness and awareness of the individual liberation, the root of the teachings. Bestow blessings to make this the essential practice. Just as I myself have fallen into samsara's ocean, all living beings as mother are also like that. By seeing the responsibility for the liberation of beings, bestow blessings to be trained in supreme bodhichitta. However, by merely generating the mind, if not acquainted with the 3 aspects of ethics, enlightenment will not be attained. By seeing this excellence, bestow blessings to train with strong effort in the vows of conqueror sons. pacifying distraction toward perverse objects by way of proper analysis of the perfect meaning, bestow blessings to swiftly and continuously generate the path related to the union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus, becoming a vessel trained in the common paths, enter the Vajrayana, supreme evolution of all vehicles. Bestow blessings to engage the easy path itself, that sacred way of crossing for fortunate beings. The base of practice for the two aspects of attainment is when guarding the pure vows of commitment is found to be genuine and certain. Bestow blessings to protect them even at risk of life. Then, by understanding properly the important points, which are the essence of the two stages of the Tantra classes, bestow blessings to practice according to these holy teachings, with continuous effort in the Supreme Four-Session Yoga. Like that, may the spiritual friend revealing the gentle path and the friends of proper practice stand firm. Bestow blessings to quickly pacify the masses of outer and inner hindrances. In all rebirths, may I never be parted from perfect gurus and the enjoyment of the glorious Dharma. By utterly completing all qualities, paths and grounds, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. So we'll start off with the meditation, because the last couple of sessions I've left it right till the end and we haven't had so much time. So I thought we'd do one of the meditations that Geshe Loden composed, which is breathing meditation to relax and subdue the mind in 4 parts. So we'll begin the session with that meditation. So firstly, sitting comfortably in meditation posture. Especially making sure that our spine is relatively straight. Hands folded in the lap. Right hand on the left palm with the thumbs touching. With our head slightly tilted forward. And having set the physical posture, also set the most beneficial mental frame for the meditation. Recognizing that because every moment of mind links to the next moment of mind, affects the content of the next moment of mind, there will definitely be some result, some influence on our mind of this time that we spend in meditation. So the practice of relaxation and subduing the mind can bring us some temporary peace and comfort. Or we can see it as part of our path of practice. Bringing more peace, more calmness, more openness into our life generally. Or we can set our aspiration broader still, thinking that by cultivating this practice of subduing the mind and relaxation, we'll bring that peace, calm and openness into all of our future lives. And with this greater peace, calm, openness, we can traverse the three scopes, completely extinguishing all of our delusion, all of our experience of suffering, through the attainment of nirvana liberation. Or further still, that this state of calmness and relaxation that we cultivate now is the cause of our realization of complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. And because of that, is also the cause of unlimited benefit to every other fellow sentient being without exception. Each of whom at some time has shown immeasurable love and kindness to us. And so this practice of relaxation right now, if motivated for enlightenment, can be part of repaying that kindness. So we reflect on our motivation for a short time. And we allow our attention to gather inwards so that it collects and settles on just one object, the natural rise and fall of our breath. Then we turn our attention to the out-breath. Feeling that with each out-breath, we expel all old, stale air and energy from our body. We can feel that with each out-breath, as this old, stale air is expelled, our body feels lighter, more vibrant, more energetic, more relaxed. Then turn our attention to the in-breath. Feel that with each inhalation, we draw very fresh, clean air into our body. Such as air from the high mountains, from the forests, or from the ocean. With each inhalation, this pure, clean, fresh air enters our body, invigorating us, pervading us with energy. And concentrating again on the out breath, feel that with each out breath, we exhale all of our suffering, all of our disease or illness, all of our problems, the things that are worrying us, any bad conditions we're experiencing. We can visualize them in the form of black smoke as we exhale them. And see them dissolve into empty space. We can reflect that this meditation has a valid basis, because any of our problems, no matter how difficult and challenging they seem, are mere products. They depend on causes. When the causes cease, the experience ceases. And as products, they are dependent arisings. Under analysis, have no true or ultimate existence. So we can reflect like that as we exhale all of our problems, illness, worries, and so forth in the form of black smoke. We can then again turn our attention to the in-breath. feeling that with each in-breath, from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, white light is drawn in, dissolving to our heart, bringing with it all happiness, enjoyment, energy, health, and good conditions. Increasing all of our realizations of the path to enlightenment. The energy of our renunciation, the energy of our great love, great compassion, bodhichitta, the energy of our wisdom. Again, this has a valid basis. Because all of our realizations of the path to enlightenment and all good conditions are dependent arisings, dependent on mind. Also, the wisdom, truth body of all the Buddhas knows all phenomena and so pervades all phenomena, including our mind. Also, all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have pledged to work for the enlightenment of all living beings, including ourselves, until samsara ends. And so if we are open and receptive, the energy of their activities is there. So we meditate like that, with the in-breath drawing in all of these qualities. We can reflect that our body becomes pure and clear like crystal. Our mind likewise subdued and clear. To conclude the meditation, we can reflect on the motivation we began with, dedicating with a thought. May this practice of relaxing and subduing the body and mind be the cause that step by step I develop all realizations of the path to enlightenment. Step by step, eliminate my obstructions, my negativities, develop all my positive qualities. For the purpose of quickly attaining enlightenment. To benefit every living being without exception. That's the result that I would like in this meditation. Okay. Kat had a question from last week that I'll cover off at the end, and again I will leave some time for other questions as well if anybody has them. If you like, you could really send them through at any time, and Mana can send them through at the end, or I'll spend a couple of minutes answering Kat's question, and so that'll give people an opportunity to send you any other questions that they might have as well. So last week we began the subject of the lower realms, which is covered in chapter 9 of Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. And just to set the context, we explained that was part of an important subsection in the text, which is under the heading, the means of taking the essence of leisure and fortune. And immediately underneath that, there are, again, two major subheadings. One which is called acquiring conviction regarding the aspects of the path, which explains the concept of the three scopes, which is a way of grading or categorising the progressive stages of the path to enlightenment, or the progressive practices that we engage in on our own path to enlightenment. And then secondly, the actual way of taking the essence of leisure and fortune. So how it is that we can use this life of leisure and fortune that we currently have, and the opportunities that it gives to us in the most valuable way. And the way of doing that is by successively practicing the paths of the three scopes: small scope, medium scope, and great scope. And we talked about the fact that these are defined by reference to the different objectives that they have, or what we're trying to achieve as a result of engaging in these practices. So the small scope teachings, what they're essentially aimed at doing is to ensure that we have higher status and happiness in future lives. So there are two types of small scope beings: those who are interested mainly in attaining happiness in this life, and secondly, those whose main focus is on attaining happiness in future lives. And the teachings of the small scope, their focus is on the second. So if our motivation is merely to achieve better conditions, more happiness in this life, well, then we're not actually practicing the small scope. If we've actually achieved the realisation of the small scope, the way that we know that we've achieved it is when we genuinely, from our heart, have a heartfelt interest in obtaining higher status or happiness in our future life, and that is more important to us than the happiness or enjoyment that we currently have in this life. So that in itself is would be a very significant attainment, very different from the way that we currently go about things. Under the small scope, the small scope teachings again have two major divisions, and the first is about how we develop that aspiration, how it is that we go about building that genuine interest and energy in achieving a better result in our future life as opposed to this life. So the first two subjects, that of death and lower realms, are developed at doing that. And the second part of the small scope is, once we've developed that aspiration, how we actually go about achieving happiness in future lives. And the practices that are taught as the main means of doing that are, of course, refuge and karma. All of this, of course, is in the context of Path to Enlightenment being a Mahayana teaching. So although we can practice the small scope teachings with that objective in mind of avoiding unfortunate a lower rebirth or greater suffering in cyclic existence, we can do that, and that's a valid basis for practice. When we're learning about these teachings, practicing these teachings from a Mahayana perspective, we are approaching them as a basis for developing renunciation, because with renunciation, then we also have the foundation for being able to practice the medium scope, which takes us beyond merely the aspiration to achieve greater happiness in future rebirths, but rather to achieve complete liberation from cyclic existence, from the unsatisfactory conditions of both lower rebirths and higher rebirths. And then based on that, based on the realisation of and the understanding of the medium scope, the ability to practice the great scope, the Mahayana teachings, which, if we practice them with proper motivation, are the means of achieving complete enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings, without exception. So as I said last week, Geshe Loden comments at the end of chapter 8 that we're practicing these teachings, not that is the teachings of the path of small scope, and particularly these first two chapters about developing the aspiration for future lives, not mainly in order to develop blissful or happy or relaxed states of mind, but rather to develop our energy and motivation. And as mentioned last week as well, that's actually the case when we're talking about rebirth, whatever type of rebirth state we're contemplating. So the path to enlightenment talks about here there's a division that refers to meditating on the suffering and happiness of the two types of being. The two types of being are those in lower realms or those in higher states of existence. And from a Buddhist perspective, actually neither is desirable in that it involves a rebirth in psychic existence. But the discussion of the faults of higher rebirths is something that's covered in the medium scope teachings. And here we're looking particularly at the states of lower rebirths and the faults of those and how to avoid them. So, as we also went through in some detail last week, we might need to do some preliminary thinking about this, because contemplating these subjects is not something that's likely to come naturally for most of us. In many ways, it's likely to be quite challenging. We might think to ourselves, well, what's the point of doing this? What's the point of contemplating the possibility that I might be in some much worse state that I am in now? The answer to that is the point of it is to recognise it and to minimise the likelihood of us actually experiencing that in future by understanding its causes and by avoiding those causes. We might also have the reaction that it could be unhealthy in some ways to contemplate the possibility of future suffering. Again, it's important to be aware of our own state of mind at a particular time. So if at a particular a particular time in our life, doing these meditations or contemplating these subjects is going to paralyse us or upset us, well then it wouldn't be advised. But on the other hand, we shouldn't. It's not productive to regard that as a reason for never contemplating these subjects. Ultimately, the reason for doing that, for contemplating what might happen at the end of this life, is to approach the reality that at some time or another this life is going to end. We don't know when it's going to happen, but to contemplate the possibilities is useful, because then we can plan for them and think about how we might set the causes for the most positive outcome. And as we said last week, there are other parts of our life where we do this, where we've got lots of uncertainty, but nonetheless we don't simply say, well, I'm not going to plan. And indeed, there are times in our life where we contemplate the possibility of being in danger, of being at risk of injury. But an example we went through last week is if we're in a fire, if we live in a fire-prone zone, well then we inform ourselves about those risks, we do everything we can to mitigate those risks, we have a plan. And so really the question of the possibility of having a future rebirth that's difficult or unchallenging, such as those described in the lower realms, we're adopting the same attitude. Again, as we talked about, it's useful to genuinely be aware of how we feel about these teachings. We need to analyse them using the three wisdoms, using the Buddha's method of rubbing, burning, and cutting the gold, not simply accepting teachings because they are given to us without doing that type of analysis. So we need to apply analysis using the types of the three cognizers that we talked about last week. So direct valid cognizers, inferential cognizers through the power of fact, and inferential cognizers through the power of belief. So as we said last week, an example of a direct cognizer would be when we see a fire. So we can see it with our eye consciousness, and the fire is a manifest object. And we can also know things through inference. So an inferential cognizer through the power of fact is where we don't see the fire, but we see the smoke. And we know just as clearly as if we had seen the fire itself. We know when we see the smoke that there must be a fire. And so we know that phenomenon. We know the fire even though it's not manifest. Instead, it's a slightly hidden phenomenon. Also, we can have inferential cognizers through the power of belief. So if somebody that we absolutely trust, we know that they wouldn't joke about that sort of stuff. If somebody tells us that there's a fire in the next room, then we don't doubt it. We can actually say that we know that there is a fire in the next room, even though we haven't seen the fire, we haven't seen the smoke, but we have received the information from somebody we can trust. So all of these types of methods or cognizers we can use in developing our understanding of future lives and future rebirth states, bearing in mind that for the most part, from where we are at the moment, these are hidden phenomena. We can't actually see them directly. However, as we said, Buddhism is clear. From a Buddhist point of view, when our life ends, our body will disintegrate, but our mind will continue. And if we contemplate that possibility for ourselves, so if we think about what might happen at the time that our life ends, and we know that our life will end, we can see that there are these two possibilities. The first is that our mental continuum just ceases, it just stops then and there. Or secondly, our mental continuum continues. So we continue to experience beyond the end of this life into our next existence. So, as we also said last week, some might see the view that the mental continuum ceases completely as a more rational or scientific belief, but actually when you analyse, we can see that it's no more rational or scientific than the contrary view. So we need really to investigate this for ourselves. If we come from a Western cultural background, we might have a feeling that the idea of a future rebirth is outlandish or fantastic, but again, we have to analyse where that is coming from. And if we do, then we'll find that largely that's a reflection of our own cultural background. And of course, there are millions, tens of millions, billions of people on this planet who simply accept rebirth as the cultural assumption. So again, we need to work these things through and think about them. What we do know, without any speculation, is that there are only those two possibilities. So the first possibility is at the end of life, that's the end of the story, or the second possibility is that this isn't the end of the story and our mental continuum goes on. What we can also conclude is that it's difficult to say that either of those, or particularly it's difficult to say that the first is the only possibility. It's difficult to say that we can conclude with certainty and clarity and no doubt that our mental continuum, our mind, is going to end when our life finishes. If we think it through, it seems that the second, the possibility that our mind continues, has to be a logical possibilities. So if we accept that, if we accept that the second is a logical, a real possibility, then it's useful to think what that actually means for us. What could our next life be like? At some point, this is going to become real. So at the time when we are close to our death, this won't merely become intellectual speculation. At that point, we really need to contemplate what might we experience if our mind continues after the end of this life. So there are probably a few ways that we can approach that or start thinking about what that might mean, what it might mean if our mind continues at the end of this life. So one thing we can see if we look at our mind now is that there's an embedded pattern of that we experience things on a continuum of pleasant and unpleasant, or of happiness and unhappiness. So that's something that happens throughout our life, day in or day out. We approach everything that we experience through this frame of, I like it, I don't like it, I want to get closer to it, I want to get away from it. In the Abhidharma teachings of mind and mental factors, it's this tendency is referred to as the mental factor of feeling, and it literally pervades every moment of our conscious existence. So the Abhidharma teachings describe the mind in terms of main minds or primary minds and accompanying mental factors. So our main minds or primary minds are like our main channels of consciousness, our eye consciousness, our ear consciousness, smell consciousness, and so forth, including our mental consciousness. For every moment of those main minds or primary consciousnesses, there are also secondary consciousnesses or mental factors, and there are different systems in the way that these mental factors are explained and presented. But all of the systems talk about the fact that of these mental factors, there are 5 that are omnipresent. So they're always going to be there in every moment of mind, with everything that we're experiencing. So in this life, they're with us from the moment that we're born until the moment that we leave this life. And one of those 5 omnipresent mental factors, one of the 5 that is always with us in every moment of mind, is this mental factor of feeling. So everything we know comes with an accompanying experience of either being a pleasant experience, an unpleasant experience, or a neutral experience, although actually truly neutral experiences are relatively rare. Usually there'll be at least some tendency toward us feeling that something that we're experiencing is either pleasant or unpleasant. But there can be degrees as to whether it's extremely unpleasant or extremely pleasant, or somewhere in between. So this is happening. So this tendency, this pattern of going through our life, experiencing everything in these boxes of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, is something that's happening moment by moment, but it's also happening in a macro way. So it also determines and shapes the choices that we make in this life. We're always looking for things that we think are going to be enjoyable, or things that are going to support, even if they're not enjoyable in themselves, that are going to support our enjoyment. So we might not, so for example, we might not particularly think that that our job is a source of great enjoyment in itself, but we do it, and we seek employment because we know that it's the cause, it's the basis of having an income, which supports our enjoyment in other ways. So we can see this pervades everything we do. If we look around us, look at every other human being, in fact, look at every other non-human being, we'll see that the same pattern is there. Everybody, 24/7, we're looking for ways to experience more happiness, and to get away from things that are obstacles to our happiness. So if our mental continuum goes beyond the end of this life, why would it be any different? If we contemplate all of our own experience and all of the experiences we can see in other living beings, it suggests that we're still going to be doing that in our next rebirth. We also know that in this life at the moment, we experience the full spectrum of pleasant experiences and unpleasant experiences. So perhaps in our life at some time we have limited control over our ability to avoid unpleasant experiences and to experience positive or pleasant experiences. How do we know this? Well, we know this because we spend all of our time trying to avoid unpleasant experiences, but still they come up from time to time. And we all think about and try and work so hard to organise those wonderful, meaningful experiences, but it's difficult to just summon them up. So we can see that we can have limited control over, even in this life, on our ability to experience pleasant, happy, relaxed states of mind, and to avoid unpleasant, difficult, suffering states of mind. One of the wonderful things about meditation is that it brings us into that more controlled space. So we all know that if we're feeling stressed, unhappy, that things are closing in on us, then creating a peaceful space in meditation is a way of controlling our mind and bringing our mind back to greater equilibrium. But apart from that, generally, we have limited control over what, not so much over what life is going to throw at us, but how we are going to experience it. We experience it according to our karma, through the mental factor of feeling. So why would this be any different in our next life if our mind continues? So it might be different if we have more control over our experience or our mind than we do at the moment in this life, but how is that going to happen? And given the teachings on leisure and fortune, what are the odds on us in our next life having access to guidance from a qualified teacher that will enable us to exert more control over our mind, to put a stronger direction on the type of experience that we have? When we look around us, how many living beings at the moment have access to guidance like that? How many living beings, even if they have access to it, are actually open-minded to that, are receptive to it? And even if they have both of those things, how many of them have an opportunity right now to study, to learn, to meditate, to really develop their mind? So if we look around us, we can see that there are very few living beings at the moment who have that, especially if we consider it in the context of the number of living beings on this planet as a whole. And so we've got to ask ourselves, what's the likelihood of us being in that type of situation in an next rebirth? We're going to have this tendency, we can infer, to continuously look for happiness and to avoid suffering. We're going to have limited control over our ability to do that unless we have access to the means of developing and stabilising our mind. We also know that in this life, what we experience day to day is shaped by our mind. So we know that there's a link between what's happening in our mind today and how we're going to feel about things tomorrow. So if we have a really blazing argument with somebody today, so they say really hurtful things to us, we say really hurtful things to them, then that's certainly going to that's certainly going to affect our experience for tomorrow. If we spend our day-to-day being with people that we're close to, having experience of great enjoyment, of settling our mind down through meditation, well, likewise, that's going to affect the quality of mind, the quality of our experience tomorrow. So we all realise this. So even if we're not interested in Buddhism, so many people do meditation or yoga in order to bring more calm or space into their lives. So even if they're doing it with the motivation of simply improving the quality of this current life, so they're the first type of a small scope being, if you like, still we naturally assume that there are things that we can do right now, things we can do with our mind that are going to create habits that improve the quality of our future experience. And like I say, this is even if you don't have a Buddhist perspective on us, this is something, for example, that pervades the views and motivation of a lot of the mental health industry. For example, examining our behaviour, being aware of the behaviours that cause us difficulty or stress or suffering, and seeking to modify those. So again, we do know that what we put into our mind today, what we're doing with our mind today, is going to affect our experience tomorrow. And so we put effort, because we all want a better experience tomorrow, we put effort into changing our habits, changing our outlook, developing more peace, happiness, and more good qualities. If we think about the real possibility that our mind continues beyond the end of this life, well, then it makes sense not only to be interested in developing greater peace, greater contentment, greater stability of mind, more good heart, not only in this life, but also in our future states of mind. And the same logic that suggests that we can affect the future moments of our mental continuum in this life, that would suggest that if our mind does continue, that it's also going to bring about a result in our next life as well. Another implication of the second possibility, that our mind continues following our death of this life, is that in this life at the moment, there are places and situations that are more or less pleasant. There's a huge range of circumstances that living beings on this planet live in at the moment. So we know there are some situations that are truly, truly terrifying, truly horrific. So for any living being who lives in a war zone, who goes through the experience of war, coming to their home, destroying the place they live, destroying their family, destroying infrastructure, and so forth. Living continuously with the fear of being injured or killed, either for oneself or for one's own family. We know at the moment that there are living beings who live with that fear and that experience day by day. It's not a fantasy. We know that there are living beings on this planet who have and who do experience extraordinary torture at the hands of other people. We know that there are billions of people on this planet who live under strict authoritarian regimes. What they say, what they do, the way they use social media is scrutinised moment by moment. And if they put a step out of line, well then they will be detected and punished. We know that there are tens of millions of people in this world who live in refugee camps, and many of whom realistically have no obvious chance of ever being resettled in a nation that will welcome them, who are in a situation where they themselves, for their own life and for the lives of their children, really face no prospect of or can't be confident that they're going to be in a situation where they can live in a peaceful country, enjoy living with their family, enjoy doing all of the things that we take for granted. We know that there are places in the world where living beings experience famine regularly. There are places where there is inadequate healthcare. So places at the moment where facing the COVID epidemic, it's bad. So we feel ourselves stressed enough and anxious at the situation in Australia, particularly at the moment. But if we were in a place where there are no reliable vaccines, no prospect of getting vaccines until the rich world has been able to use all of the vaccines that they've brought up, where the health system is completely overrun, where there's a lack of oxygen, millions and millions of people who are living in that situation. So we know that in this life at the moment, there are situations that if we were suddenly put into any of those situations at the moment and said, this is your life, it would seem terrifying to us. Any being who is in that situation wants to get out of that just as desperately as we would, but nonetheless, at the moment, they don't have choice. They don't have the ability to control the situation. We also know that there are people in this world at the moment who are in extraordinarily fortunate situations, and we really have to number ourselves amongst them, particularly based on the teachings of leisure and fortune. But even apart from people who just have the enormous good fortune of living in a country like Australia, we know that there are also people with extraordinary wealth, harbourside mansions, the best cars, extraordinary furniture, art collections, jewellery, the best food that they ever want. So we know that on this world there's an extraordinary range of situations. And so therefore it suggests that if our mind continues, if we experience a future rebirth, that there is a huge range of experiences or of situations that we could find ourselves. And particularly from the point of view of the teachings on leisure and fortune, the most important practical aspect of that is whether or not we're going to be in a situation where we are able to continue to practice Dharma, because it's the ability to practice Dharma that gives us the real ability to control what our experience is like. If we have more control over our mind, then our ability to extract enjoyment and to deal with the suffering that comes from difficult circumstances is much improved. We're much more robust, much more resilient, and ultimately, through the practice of the medium scope, we're able to eliminate the karmic causes that lead to those types of experience. So it's 20 past 5, so I didn't actually get as far as I meant to. So we'll continue next week. But I will, if anybody has some questions, I will take them. But first I'll respond to the question that Kat raised last week. But if anybody else has any questions, then please feel free to send them through. So Kat's question, because we were talking about the death process, etc., was whether or not we were able to be conscious of consciousness. So that when we go through the death process, are we able to be aware of what's happening and not try to grasp onto our body or just allow our consciousness to be thrown like a dream? And based on what Geshe says in Path of Enlightenment, yes, that is possible. So it is possible for us to develop mindfulness of our experience during the death process, although it's not easy for ordinary practitioners such as us. So in chapter 15 of Path of Enlightenment, Death and Rebirth, Geshe talks about the death process in some detail, and he explains that from a Buddhist point of view, there are a number of stages of the process, which are known as dissolutions. And they're called dissolutions because various aspects of our mental functioning progressively start to dissolve. So first, the coarser levels of function begin to dissolve as we go through the death process, and eventually leaving only more subtle levels of consciousness. So if you look at that explanation in chapter 15, and it's good to have a look at it oneself, for an ordinary person, our ability to be aware of what's going on dissolves quite early in the death process. So our ability to maintain the coarse level of conceptual thought is one of the first things that disappears as we begin to die. And so for most of us, we would slip out of consciousness and wouldn't be able to be mindful of what's happening and take direct control of the experience. If we are a great yogi, then we would be able to do that. And as we know with Geshe Loden, he was able to remain in meditation for approximately 10 days after his breathing stopped. But for ordinary practitioners, that's quite difficult. However, if we do train in recognising the stages of the death process and become a very accomplished meditator, so we become very skilled at the practice of calm abiding and special insight, then it is possible to retain consciousness, to retain a subtle consciousness at the time of the death process, and to use that subtle consciousness to meditate. So the final stage of the death process is known as the clear light of death, and Geshe says at page 450 of Path to Enlightenment that a great yogi is able to meditate on the clear light of death for a long period of time, even for weeks. As I was saying, in Geshe case, his body remained unchanged for a period of 10 days after his breathing stopped. So the actual methods for developing that sort of skill, the practices that support that, are explained in more detail in the Vajrayana, but Geshe does explain in that same chapter, in chapter 15 of Path to Enlightenment, that for an ordinary person who doesn't have that type of extraordinary skill in meditation, that the main thing to do at the time of death is to cultivate positive minds. And this is explained at page 442 of the text. In order to be able to easily cultivate positive minds at the state of death, such as great love, great compassion, bodhichitta, and so forth, then we need to be practiced at developing those states of mind during our life. So all of the meditation that we do on great love, great compassion, bodhicitta, renunciation, and so forth, all of our practices of the Path to Enlightenment are strengthening the habit of, the mental framework of being able to generate that state of mind, so that at the time of death, it's more likely that we'll be able to give rise to a virtuous mind, and then that will mean that it's more likely that a positive karma will ripen at the time of death. So if there are no additional questions, then we'll do the final prayers. So we'll begin with the final prayer of the graduated path, and we'll do this just in English today. This is on page 31 of the prayer book. Darkness of beings, may I uphold the Conqueror's teaching for a long time. Where the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but becomes generate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, may I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvellous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring for liberation. May the conqueror's deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans who remove the obstructions and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path never be parted for all of their lifetimes from the purest of paths which the Buddhas have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out, reaching all. And then finally we'll do the general dedication prayers on page 34, and we'll do these just in English again today. By this virtue, may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the two holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. May the precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. So thank you very much, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful week. Stay warm, stay safe, and see you next week. Thanks very much.